Queen Nala stood on her crystal balcony, watching her world die. The wind howled through the frozen streets below, carrying sounds she had never heard before in her 1,000 years of life. Her people were crying. The proud Zephyrians, who had ruled the galaxy for centuries, were breaking apart like fragile glass. The cold was unlike anything they had ever experienced. Her species had evolved on ice worlds, thriving in temperatures that would kill most aliens instantly. But this freeze was different. It came from deep space, a cosmic storm that had wrapped around their planet like a deadly blanket. Even their strongest warriors were cracking, their crystalline skin splitting under the impossible cold. Nala touched her own arm and felt the hairline fractures spreading. Soon, she would shatter too. The great crystal cities that had stood for millennia were going dark one by one. The heating systems, powered by technology that other species could barely understand, were failing. The emergency generators had lasted only days. Now her people huddled in the inner chambers of their palaces, sharing what little warmth remained. She walked through the corridors of her palace, past rooms where families pressed together, their crystal bodies dim and fading. Children who once glowed with inner light now barely flickered. Elders who had lived for thousands of years were becoming as still as ordinary stones. In the council chambers, her advisors sat in silence. What could they say? They had contacted every major species in the galaxy, begging for help. The results were always the same. The Corvani said they were too busy with their own wars. The Thessian Federation claimed they lacked the resources. The orbital collectives simply ignored their messages. Everyone remembered how the Zephyrians had acted for centuries. They had been proud, cold, and distant. They had refused help to others, claiming their crystal technology made them superior. They had turned away refugees, ignored distress calls, and looked down on younger species as primitive and worthless. Now, when they needed help, the galaxy was returning the favor. Nala's chief advisor, Lord Keth, approached her with news that made her crystal heart nearly stop. The outer districts had gone completely silent. Thousands of her people had already died, their bodies becoming part of the frozen landscape. The survivors were retreating deeper into the planet's core, but even that would not save them for long. She stared at the communication console, its screen showing one last option: the newest members of the Galactic Council, a species so young that most civilizations barely acknowledged their existence. They called themselves humans. The Zephyrians had laughed when humans first appeared in galactic politics. They were soft, weak creatures from a warm little planet. They had no advanced technology, no great armies, no crystal cities that could withstand cosmic storms. They were nothing special, but they were also the only ones who had not yet refused her calls for help. Nala's pride fought against her desperation. To ask humans for help would be the ultimate humiliation. Her people would never forgive her. The galaxy would mock them forever. The great Crystal Empire, saved by primitives who had barely learned to travel between stars, she looked out at her dying world one more time. Pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. With trembling fingers, she composed the message that would change everything. She sent a distress call to the humans, knowing it might be her people's last hope for survival. Captain Lee was drinking his morning coffee when the communication alert chimed on the bridge of the Aurora. It was supposed to be a routine patrol. Mission near the outer colonies, nothing exciting. He almost ignored the incoming transmission, thinking it was probably another trade dispute or navigation request. But something about the signal was different. It was heavily encrypted, using diplomatic channels that only major galactic powers could access. When he finally decoded it, his coffee cup nearly slipped from his hands. The message was from Queen Nala herself, ruler of the mighty Zephyrian Crystal Empire. Lee had seen her once during a galactic assembly, a towering figure made of living crystal who barely acknowledged the existence of humans. Now, her voice cracked with something he had never heard from any Zephyrian before: fear. To any who received this message, the recording began, the Zephyrian homeworld faces extinction. Our people are dying. We have contacted all major species for assistance, but none have responded. We ask for help from anyone willing to provide it. The transmission included coordinates and environmental data that made Lee's blood run cold. The temperatures on the Zephyrian homeworld had dropped to levels that would kill even the hardiest Arctic species within minutes. The entire planet was becoming a frozen tomb. Within an hour, his communication console lit up with an urgent message from Earth Command. Admiral Park's face appeared on screen, his expression stern and worried. "Captain Lee, you are ordered to ignore that transmission and continue your patrol route. Intelligence suggests this could be a Zephyrian trap. They've never asked for help from anyone, especially not from humans. This is suspicious." Lee stared at the screen. "Sir, what if it's not a trap? What if they're really dying? The Zephyrians have made it clear for decades that they consider us inferior. They've refused every offer of friendship, every trade agreement, every cultural exchange. Why would they suddenly need our help now?" The Admiral had a point. The Crystal Empire had treated humanity like annoying insects since first contact. They had blocked human expansion into certain sectors, refused to share technology, and made it clear that they saw humans as barely worthy of galactic citizenship. But Lee kept thinking about the Queen's voice. He had heard desperation before, in the voices of colony survivors, in distress calls from lost ships, in the final transmissions from doomed expeditions. This sounded real. After the call ended, Lee gathered his crew in the common area. 12. Good people who had volunteered for deep space missions, knowing the risks. Engineer Han, who could fix anything with spare parts and determination. Dr. Kim, who had saved more lives than anyone could count. Navigator Cho, who could plot a course through any dangerous space. Communications Officer Yoon, who spoke 6 alien languages fluently. He told them about the message and Earth Command's orders. He explained that going to help could be a trap that would get them all killed. He also explained that ignoring the call might mean watching an entire civilization die. "So what do we do, Captain?" asked Han, speaking for the group. Lee looked around at their faces. These weren't career soldiers following blind orders. These were explorers, scientists, and helpers who had joined the space service to make a difference in the galaxy. "I'm setting course for the Zephyrian homeworld," he said quietly. "Anyone who wants to transfer to another ship when we reach the next starbase can do so. No questions asked, no black marks on your record, nobody moved." "Are we really going to help the same aliens who've treated us like dirt for 20 years? asked Kim. "Yes," Lee replied, "because that's what humans do." The shuttle's landing thrusters struggled against the howling wind as Captain Lee brought them down in what used to be the Royal Plaza. Through the cockpit window, he could see the once magnificent Crystal City stretched out before them, now dark and lifeless. The towering spires that had gleamed like diamonds were covered in thick ice, and not a single light flickered in any of the buildings. "Temperature outside is minus 60 degrees Celsius and dropping," reported Navigator Cho, checking his instruments. "That's cold enough to kill us in minutes without protection." Lee pulled on his heaviest thermal suit and grabbed extra heating packs. "Stay with the shuttle and keep the engines warm. If something goes wrong, get back to the Aurora immediately." "Captain, you can't go out there alone," protested Dr. Sayers. "Kim, I have to. If this is a trap, no point in all of us walking into it. If it's real, then someone needs to make first contact." The airlock hissed open, and Lee stepped into a world of ice and silence. The cold hit him like a physical blow, even through his protective gear. His breath came out in great white clouds that froze and fell to the ground like snow. Each step crunched through ice that was several inches thick. The palace doors, once guarded by elite crystal warriors, stood wide open. Lee called out, but heard no response except the echo of his own voice. He activated his suit's heating system to maximum and pressed forward into the dark corridors. The inside of the palace was even more shocking than the outside. Everywhere he looked, he saw the frozen forms of Zephyrians who had simply stopped moving. Their crystal bodies had lost all color and warmth, becoming like statues made of cloudy glass. Some were curled up in corners, others had collapsed while walking. The sight made Lee's stomach turn. He followed the main corridor toward what his scanner indicated was the throne room. The massive doors were cracked and partially fallen from their hinges. Inside, he found a scene that would stay with him forever. Queen Nala sat on her crystal throne, but she was nothing like the proud ruler he had seen at the Galactic Assembly. Her once brilliant crystal form was dim and grey, covered with hairline. cracks that spread across her entire body. Her head was tilted forward and she wasn't moving. For a moment Lee thought he was too late. Then he saw the faintest glimmer of light deep within her chest, like a dying ember. Around the throne room a dozen other Zephyrians sat or lay motionless. These were probably her closest advisors and guards, staying with their queen until the very end. They watched with dim, barely alive eyes as the strange human approached their ruler. Lee didn't think about protocol or diplomatic procedures. He didn't worry about whether touching an alien queen might cause an intergalactic incident. He just saw someone who was dying from cold, and he knew how to help. He quickly unzipped his thermal coat and wrapped it around Queen Nala's shoulders. The material was designed for extreme cold weather survival, lined with heating elements and insulation that could keep a human alive in space. But more importantly, he sat down on the step of her throne and pulled her against his chest, sharing his body heat directly. The other Zephyrians gasped, a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. In their entire history, no alien had ever touched their queen. She was considered sacred, untouchable, above all other beings. And here was this human, holding her like she was just another person who needed help. Lee felt the queen's crystal body slowly warming against him. The cracks in her skin began to seal, and a faint glow returned to her core. After several long minutes, she stirred and lifted her head. Her voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the throne room, everyone heard her first words. "Why?" "Because you needed help," Captain Lee answered simply, still holding Queen Nala close as warmth slowly returned to her crystal body. "And we could give it." The queen stared at him with eyes that were beginning to glow again. In all her 1,000 years, no one had ever given her such a straightforward answer to anything. There were no political calculations, no requests for payment, no hidden agendas, just pure human honesty. Within hours, the rest of Lee's crew had shuttled down from the Aurora, bringing with them every piece of heating equipment they could find. Engineer Park carried a bag full of portable heaters, the kind human colonists used when setting up new settlements on cold worlds. They weren't fancy or high-tech, but they worked. "These aren't much compared to your crystal technology," Park said to one of the surviving Zephyrian engineers, "but they'll keep you alive while we figure out something better." The alien looked at the simple heating device with confusion. "But how does it generate thermal energy without a crystal matrix? Where is the power source?" Park smiled and showed him the basic battery pack. "Sometimes the simplest solutions work best. We learned that the hard way when we were still figuring out how to survive on different planets." Meanwhile, Dr. Kim was teaching a group of young Zephyrians something that seemed impossible to them: how to share body heat. The crystal people had always been solitary, maintaining individual space even in their family groups. The idea of physical contact for survival was completely foreign. "I know this feels strange," Kim said gently, demonstrating with two of the children, "but when humans get cold, we huddle together. Body heat keeps us alive. Watch. When you sit close like this, you both stay warmer." The young Zephyrians looked at each other uncertainly, then slowly moved closer. As their crystal bodies touched, they gasped in surprise. The shared warmth was something they had never experienced before, and they could feel their inner light growing brighter. Communications Officer Yoon was working with the adult Zephyrians, teaching them how to layer materials for better insulation. She showed them how to wrap themselves in multiple thin sheets rather than one thick covering, how to trap air between layers, and how to seal gaps where heat could escape. "Your crystal bodies conduct heat very efficiently," Yoon explained, "which is normally good, but right now it's working against you. These layering techniques will help you hold on to warmth longer." Navigator Cho had perhaps the most important job, teaching them about movement and exercise. The Zephyrians, used to standing motionless for hours at a time, had no idea that physical activity could generate heat. "Watch this," Cho said, and began doing jumping jacks in the throne room. "When humans get cold, we move around. It gets our blood flowing and creates heat from the inside." Soon, the incredible sight of crystal aliens doing basic human exercises filled the palace. They moved awkwardly at first, their bodies not designed for such motion, but they could feel the warmth building inside them with each movement. Queen Nala watched all of this from her throne, still wrapped in Captain Lee's coat. These humans had brought no advanced technology, no miraculous machines, no cosmic weapons. They had brought blankets, basic heaters, and knowledge that any human child would consider common sense. Yet her people were surviving. For the first time in weeks, she could hear voices in the palace corridors. The dim glow was returning to crystal bodies throughout the city. Children were laughing as they learned to huddle together for warmth. "Your people," she said to Lee. "They're not just giving us heat, they're teaching us something we forgot." "What's that?" Lee asked. "How to take care of each other." Over the next 3 days, Queen Nala felt life returning to her crystal body. The hairline cracks that had threatened to shatter her completely were healing, sealed by the steady warmth from Captain Lee's thermal coat and the care of his crew. But something else was changing inside her too, something that had nothing to do with temperature. She watched from her throne as the humans worked tirelessly throughout her city. They never stopped, never complained, never asked for anything. In return, Engineer Park had been awake for 36 hours straight, moving from building to building, setting up heating stations wherever he found survivors. Dr. Kim had turned the palace medical wing into a treatment center, teaching Zephyrian healers how to treat cold-related injuries with simple human techniques. What amazed Nala most was how the humans treated her people. The Zephyrians had spent centuries looking down on other species, calling them inferior, refusing to help when disasters struck their worlds. They had turned away refugee ships, ignored calls for aid, and acted like they were too important to care about anyone else's problems. Now the shoe was on the other foot. Her proud empire was broken, her people were dying, and these primitive humans were saving them with nothing but kindness and basic survival skills. "Captain Lee," she called to him during one of his regular check-ins. He was carrying a box of emergency blankets to distribute to families in the lower levels of the palace. "Yes, Your Majesty." "Why are you doing this?" The question had been burning inside her for days. "My people have never shown kindness to yours. We blocked your trade routes, refused your diplomatic offers, treated you like children who didn't belong at the adult table. Why risk your lives for us?" Lee set down his box and looked at her with those strange human eyes, so small and dark compared to the crystal formations that served as Zephyrian eyes. His expression was patient, like a teacher explaining something simple to a confused student. "Your Majesty, when I was young, my family lived on a colony world that got hit by massive storms every few years. One time our crops were destroyed and our power generators failed. We were going to starve or freeze before supply ships could reach us." Nala listened carefully, trying to understand where this story was going. A ship full of complete strangers landed during the worst of the storm. They were from a different colony, people we'd never met, who had their own problems to worry about. But they shared their food with us, helped us repair our generators, and stayed until we were safe. When my parents asked why they risked their lives for us, the captain said something I never forgot. What did he say? He said, "Because you needed help, and we could give it." That's all. No complicated reasons, no political calculations. Just simple human logic. If someone needs help and you can provide it, you help them. Queen Nala felt something crack inside her chest, but not from the cold this time. It was like a wall breaking down, a barrier she had built around her heart over centuries of ruling, with cold logic and crystal-hard pride. "But we've been cruel. To your people," she whispered. "We've acted like you don't matter." Lee nodded. "That's true, but that doesn't change the fact that you need help right now, and it doesn't change the fact that we can give it." For the first time in her 1,000-year reign, Queen Nala began to cry. Crystal tears fell from her glowing eyes, each one catching the light like a tiny diamond. Her advisors gasped in shock. They had never seen their queen show such emotion. "I don't understand your species," she said through her tears. "You give without taking. You help without asking for rewards. You risk your lives for people who have treated you badly. How is this possible?" Lee smiled gently. "Because that's what makes us human, Your Majesty. We're not the strongest or the smartest species in the galaxy, but we know how to care about each other." The news hit the galactic communication networks like a shockwave. Within hours, every major species in the galaxy was talking about the same impossible story. Humans had saved the Zephyrian Crystal Empire. On the Corvani homeworld, military commanders gathered around holographic displays showing footage from the Zephyrian capital. They watched in disbelief as human crew members carried heating equipment through frozen crystal streets, their small figures dwarfed by the massive alien architecture. General Vex, leader of the Corvani war fleet, slammed his fist on the conference table. "This makes no sense. The Zephyrians have been blocking human expansion for decades. They've insulted humanity at every galactic summit. Why would the humans help them?" His advisors had no answer. In Corvani culture, you only helped allies who could help you back. Enemies were left to die. It was simple survival logic that had kept their species alive for thousands of years. On the Thessian Federation's central station, scientists were running calculations on their quantum computers, trying to figure out what humans hoped to gain from this rescue mission. The results kept coming back the same. There was no logical benefit for humanity in this action. Dr. Zara, the Federation's chief xenopsychologist, stared at the data in confusion. "According to our models, humans should have ignored the Zephyrian distress call. They have nothing to gain and everything to lose. This rescue mission goes against every principle of rational self-interest." Her colleague, Professor Nen, pulled up recordings of human diplomatic meetings. "Maybe they're planning something. Maybe this is all part of some elaborate strategy we don't understand yet." But even as they said it, they both knew it didn't make sense. Humans were terrible at hiding their intentions. They were famously honest in negotiations, sometimes to their own disadvantage. The orbital collectives were having similar discussions across their network of space stations. These ancient beings, who had evolved beyond physical bodies centuries ago, existed as pure energy in crystalline matrices. They prided themselves on logical thinking without emotional interference. "The human behavior pattern does not compute," announced Collective Prime, its voice echoing through a dozen connected minds. "No species acts without calculating potential gains. Yet our analysis shows humans received the Zephyrian distress call and responded immediately, without consultation with their government or consideration of consequences." Meanwhile, in the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, an emergency session had been called. Representatives from 50 different species filled the curved rows of seats, all talking at once about the unprecedented situation. Chancellor Roth of the Altarian Republic called for order. "We are here to discuss the human intervention in Zephyrian space. As you all know, this action was taken without Council approval and against the direct orders of Earth Command." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Even the humans' own government had tried to stop this rescue mission, yet Captain Lee and his crew had gone anyway. Ambassador Kang, the human representative, stood slowly. He was a middle-aged man with graying hair, known for his calm demeanor and honest speech. The assembly fell silent as he approached the speaking podium. "Honored members of the council," he began, "I know many of you are confused by my people's actions. You're wondering what we hope to gain, what hidden agenda we might have, what strategic advantage we're seeking." He paused, looking around at the alien faces staring at him. "The truth is simpler than you might think. Captain Lee and his crew saved the Zephyrians because they were dying, and humans could help them live. That's all. There's no complex political calculation, no secret plan, no expected reward." A Corvani delegate stood up. "But Ambassador Kang, the Zephyrians have been hostile to humanity for decades. They've blocked your trade routes, insulted your diplomats, and treated your species like children. Why help your enemies?" Kang smiled, sadly. "Because when someone is dying, they're not your enemy anymore. They're just someone who needs help." The assembly erupted in confused chatter. This was beyond their understanding. In the galaxy's long history, no species had ever acted with such pure altruism. The second wave of human ships arrived just as Queen Nala was beginning to walk again. From her palace balcony, she watched as vessel after vessel landed in her frozen capital, each one bringing more hope to her dying world. The Mercy, a converted cargo hauler, touched down carrying 10,000 thermal blankets and enough portable heaters to warm an entire district. Captain Jung, a quiet woman with steady hands, had stripped every emergency supply depot between Earth and Zephyrian space to gather the equipment. When asked by Earth Command why she was disobeying orders, her response was simple. "People are freezing to death. I have blankets. Math isn't that complicated." The Hope's Dawn followed, loaded with medical supplies and staffed by volunteers who had left their jobs and families to help strangers they'd never met. Dr. Song, a young physician who specialized in extreme cold injuries, set up the first proper medical station in the palace courtyard. She worked 18-hour shifts, teaching Zephyrian healers how to treat frostbite damage to crystal skin, something that had never existed in their medical knowledge before. "The key is gradual rewarming," Dr. Song explained to a group of crystal healers demonstrating on a patient whose arm had nearly shattered from the cold. "Too much heat too fast will cause more cracks. Slow and steady, just like humans learned during our own Ice Age survival." The most surprising arrival was the Unity, a small research vessel that had been studying ice formations in a distant nebula. When they received news of the Zephyrian crisis, the entire crew voted to abandon their mission and join the rescue effort. They brought something unexpected: children. Officer Han, who had been organizing food distribution throughout the city, found herself surrounded by young human volunteers, teenagers who had insisted on coming despite their parents' protests. They moved through the Crystal City with the fearless energy of youth, carrying supplies to areas that adult humans couldn't reach, climbing through damaged buildings to find trapped survivors. "So you shouldn't be here," Han told 16-year-old Mira, who was teaching a group of young Zephyrians how to play human games to generate body heat. "Neither should you," Mira replied with teenage logic. "But here we are, and they need help. So, we help." What amazed Queen Nala most was watching her own people change. The proud Zephyrians, who had maintained strict hierarchies for thousands of years, were working alongside humans as if species barriers didn't exist. Crystal engineers collaborated with human technicians to repair heating systems. Zephyrian nobles carried supply boxes next to human volunteers. Children of both species played together in heated community centers that hadn't existed a week earlier. Lord Keth, her chief advisor, approached the Queen with a report that left her speechless. "Your Majesty, the humans have established 47 warming stations throughout the capital. They've rescued over 3,000 of our people from the outer districts, and they've done all this without asking for a single thing in return. Not even territorial rights, trade agreements, technology sharing? Nothing, Your Majesty. When I offered Captain Lee access to our crystal manufacturing processes, he said they were just glad to help. When I suggested we might discuss mining, rights as payment, Dr. Song looked confused and said she didn't understand why we'd need to pay them for doing the right thing." Queen Nala walked to her throne room, where Captain Lee was helping her youngest subjects learn human warming exercises. The sight of the proud Zephyrian royal children giggling as they did jumping jacks with their human teacher was something she never could have imagined weeks ago. "Captain," she called, "I want to make a formal announcement. Any human will forever be welcome in Zephyrian space. Your people will have free passage through our territory, access to our stations for refueling and repairs, and sanctuary in our world should you ever need it." Lee looked uncomfortable with the formal praise. "Your Majesty, that's very generous, but we didn't do this for rewards." "I know," she said softly, "and that's exactly why you deserve them." But even as she spoke, Queen Nala realized the real change wasn't in her policies toward humans. It was in how she was beginning to see the entire galaxy. For the first time in her long reign, she wondered how many other species her empire could have helped over the centuries, and how many had suffered, while the Zephyrians remained locked in their crystal towers, too proud to care. 3 months. After the rescue, Queen Nala stood before the Galactic Council for the first time since her recovery. The Great Assembly Hall was packed beyond capacity, with representatives from every known species, eager to hear what the Crystal Empire's ruler would say about her dramatic salvation. But instead of the proud, cold queen they remembered, the being who approached the podium was fundamentally changed. Her crystal form still gleamed with inner light, but there was something warmer about her presence, something more approachable than the distant ruler who had once looked down on other species. "Honored members of the Council," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "I stand before you today not as the same queen who last addressed this assembly. I have learned something that my empire forgot long ago, the true meaning of strength." The hall fell silent. Even the normally chattering Thessian delegates stopped their whispered conversations. For centuries, my people believed that power came from advanced technology, from military might, from the ability to stand alone without needing others. We thought independence was the highest virtue, and that helping others was a sign of weakness. We were wrong. She gestured to the human section, where Ambassador Kang sat with Captain Li and his crew, who had been invited as honored guests. These humans showed us that real strength comes from the willingness to help others, even when they cannot help you back. They risked their lives to save people who had treated them with scorn and dismissal. They gave their warmth to strangers who had refused them friendship. They proved that compassion is not weakness, it is the greatest power in the galaxy. Queen Nala touched a control pad, and a holographic display appeared above the assembly. It showed the text of a document that would change galactic politics forever. Today I announce the Human Warmth Doctrine, a set of principles that any civilization can adopt. First, no being should suffer alone when others can help. Second, aid should be given freely without expectation of reward. Third, the strong have an obligation to protect the weak, regardless of species or political differences. Fourth, kindness is not weakness. It is the foundation of true civilization. The assembly erupted in confused murmurs. The Corvani delegates were shaking their heads in disbelief. The orbital collectives were running rapid calculations, trying to understand the economic implications. The Thessian Federation was already drafting questions about enforcement mechanisms, but Queen Nala wasn't finished. To demonstrate my empire's commitment to these principles, I am announcing the immediate release of all Zephyrian crystal technology to any species that adopts the Human Warmth Doctrine. Our energy systems, our building techniques, our medical advances, all of it will be shared freely with civilizations that pledge to help others in need. The hall exploded in chaos. Representatives jumped to their feet, shouting questions and demands for clarification. The crystal technology of the Zephyrians was the most advanced in the galaxy, jealously guarded for millennia. The economic value was beyond calculation. Chancellor Roth hammered his gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. "Your Majesty, surely, you cannot mean to give away your empire's greatest assets without any conditions or safeguards." Queen Nala smiled, and for the first time in galactic history, a Zephyrian ruler's expression showed genuine warmth. "Chancellor, I learned from watching humans that true wealth comes not from what you hoard, but from what you share." Captain Li didn't hesitate to give me his coat when I was dying. Dr. Song didn't demand payment before treating my people. They gave freely because giving freely is who they are. She looked directly at Ambassador Kang. "Humans have shown the galaxy a better way to live. They have proven that species can rise above petty competition and political games to simply help each other survive. If my empire's technology can encourage other civilizations to follow their example, then sharing it is not a loss. It is the best investment we could possibly make." In the human section, Captain Li was trying to hide his embarrassment as thousands of alien eyes focused on his small group. He had never expected his simple decision to answer a distress call would reshape galactic civilization. Within hours of Queen Nala's announcement, the first applications began arriving. The smaller species were the quickest to respond. Worlds that had often been overlooked or bullied by larger empires suddenly saw an opportunity to gain advanced technology simply by promising to help others in need. 6 months after the Zephyrian rescue, Captain Li found himself standing on the observation deck of the Harmony, a ship that shouldn't have existed. Half human engineering, half Zephyrian crystal technology, it was the first vessel ever built through true interspecies cooperation rather than political necessity. Beside him, Queen Nala watched the viewscreen with fascination. They were observing something that would have been impossible before her people learned the meaning of human warmth, the largest humanitarian rescue operation in galactic history. The newly discovered world of Kepler Prime was dying. Volcanic eruptions had filled the atmosphere with toxic ash, and the primitive civilization there had no way to protect themselves. 6 months ago, this would have been just another tragedy that the galaxy's major powers would debate in committee, while millions died. But now everything was different. "Look at that," Lee said, pointing to the tactical display showing dozens of ships converging on the doomed planet. The Corvani battlecruiser Strength is flying alongside the Thessian medical frigate Wisdom. A year ago, those two species were threatening to go to war over trade routes. Queen Nala nodded, her crystal eyes reflecting the lights from the screen. And there, do you see the Orbital Collective's energy ships working with the Altarian mining vessels? They're sharing technology in real time to dig evacuation tunnels for the trapped population. The transformation had been faster than anyone expected. Within weeks of Queen Nala's announcement of the human warmth doctrine, 43 species had signed on. They weren't just adopting the principles on paper, they were actually following them. The first test had come when a plague struck the outer colonies of the Thessian Federation. Instead of quarantining the affected systems and letting the disease run its course, the newly formed Galactic Relief Coalition had rushed aid from 17 different species. Human doctors worked alongside Zephyrian crystal healers and Corvani field medics, sharing knowledge that saved millions of lives. "Captain," came a voice from behind them. Engineer Park approached with a datapad, her face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from coordinating relief efforts across multiple star systems. "The evacuation of the southern continent is ahead of schedule. The Zephyrian crystal shelters are protecting the population from the ash storms, while our human transport shuttles are moving them to the orbital stations." Lee smiled. "How are the different species working together down there?" "Like they've been doing it for centuries," Park replied with amazement in her voice. "I watched a Corvani warrior teaching human refugees how to strengthen their breathing in toxic air, while a Zephyrian engineer was learning human rapid construction techniques from one of our colony builders. Nobody's arguing about who's in charge or what species deserves credit. They're just helping." Queen Nala moved to another viewport where she could see the surface of Kepler Prime directly. Even through the toxic atmosphere, the rescue lights were visible, thousands of them, marking evacuation sites, medical stations, and temporary shelters. Each light represented lives being saved by the cooperative effort of species that had spent centuries competing with each other. "Do you know what amazes me most?" she asked Lee. "It's not the technology sharing or the coordinated logistics. It's how natural this feels now. 6 months ago, my advisors would have spent weeks debating whether helping these people served our strategic interests. Now, when we received the distress call, the only question anyone asked was, how fast can we get there?" Lee watched as another wave of rescue ships appeared on the edge of the system, volunteers from species so small and distant that most galactic powers had never heard of them. The human warmth doctrine had spread far beyond the major civilizations, carried by traders, explorers, and refugees who had witnessed acts of selfless kindness and wanted to pass them forward. "You know what this means, don't you?" Lee said quietly. "What? We've changed the galaxy forever. Not through war or politics or technology, but through something as simple as sharing warmth with someone who was cold." Queen Nala placed her crystal hand on Lee's shoulder, a gesture that would have been unthinkable in the old days when she considered herself above physical contact with other species. "No, Captain. Your people changed the galaxy. The rest of us just learned to follow your example." On the screen before them, the rescue operation continued around the clock. Ships from dozens of worlds worked together with seamless coordination, their crews united by a simple understanding that had started with one human captain's decision to give his coat to a dying alien queen. The age of cosmic compassion had truly begun, and it all started with the most human response of all, seeing someone in need and choosing to help.